What you notice on a vision test today often began changing quietly years earlier. The eyes are very good at adapting. They compensate, they adjust, and for a long time, they don't give you a clear warning that something is slowly becoming less efficient. I'm Dr. Warren Hung. If you care about protecting your vision as you get older, this is one of the most important things to understand. By the time eyesight feels different, the process behind that change has usually been developing for a while. If you find these explanations helpful and you want clear, practical guidance like this, consider subscribing. This channel is built to help you understand your health before small changes turn into bigger problems. Now, let's slow this down and make it simple. Your eyes are not just lenses, they are living tissue. At the back of the eye, there is a thin layer called the retina. Think of it like a highly sensitive sensor that converts light into signals your brain can understand. Inside that retina, there is a small but very important area called the macula. This is what allows you to read, recognize faces, and see fine detail. For those cells to work properly, they need three things to stay stable over time: a steady blood supply, protection from oxidative stress, and constant repair at a microscopic level. When you are younger, your body handles this quite well. Blood flow is stronger, repair systems are more efficient, the balance between damage and recovery is easier to maintain. But after the age of 60, that balance starts to shift. Blood vessels that supply the retina can become less flexible. That means slightly less oxygen and nutrients reaching those sensitive cells. At the same time, the eye is exposed to light every single day. That light creates a type of stress inside the cells called oxidative stress. You don't feel this happening. There's no pain, no obvious signal. But over time, small amounts of damage can accumulate. And here is where many people misunderstand what's happening. They notice reading feels a bit harder. Lights seem harsher at night. Contrast isn't as sharp. Recovery from bright light takes longer. And the common reaction is, this is just normal aging. There is some truth in that. Aging does change how the body functions. But the part that often gets missed is this. How your eyes age is not only determined by time, it is also influenced by what supports those cells day after day. And one of the most powerful influences on that support system is something very ordinary. Food. Not in a dramatic way, not in a quick fix way, but in a steady, cumulative way that either helps protect those retinal cells or leaves them more exposed to stress over time. For example, certain nutrients act like protective filters inside the eye. They help absorb harmful light before it damages sensitive structures. Others support the tiny blood vessels that feed the retina, helping maintain steady circulation. Some help reduce inflammation. Others help stabilize the outer layers of the cells themselves. If those supports are present consistently, the system holds up better. If they are missing, the same level of daily exposure to light and stress has a different effect. This is why two people of the same age can have very different visual outcomes. One may maintain relatively stable vision. The other may experience faster decline. And often, the difference is not just genetics. It's long-term support. Now, there's another important layer to this. The eye does not complain early. Unlike a joint that becomes painful or a muscle that becomes weak, the retina tends to stay quiet while changes are developing, which means the window for prevention is earlier than most people realize. That's also why waiting until vision clearly worsens is not the best moment to start thinking about protection. The goal is not to react to loss. The goal is to support the system before that loss becomes noticeable. And this is where understanding the role of specific foods becomes very practical. Not every food matters equally. Some have almost no direct impact on eye health. Others provide compounds that are directly used inside the retina and macula. The difference between those two patterns, repeated over years, is not small. It builds. And once you understand which foods actually support the eye at a biological level, your daily choices become much more meaningful. Because you're no longer just eating for general health. You're supporting a very specific system that depends on consistency. But before we go into the exact foods that can help protect your eyesight, you need to understand something even more important. Why the eye becomes more vulnerable after 60, even if nothing feels wrong yet. And that's where the real shift begins to show. As the years go by, the eyes are not just getting older. They are working under different conditions than they used to. And that change is subtle enough that most people don't notice it until something feels off. Let's take this step by step. First, the blood supply to the eye becomes less efficient. The retina depends on a network of very small blood vessels. These vessels have to stay flexible so they can deliver oxygen and nutrients consistently. With age, those vessels can become slightly stiffer. This is a normal biological shift, but it matters. Because when blood flow becomes less steady, the cells in the retina are no longer getting the same level of support they once did. Not dramatically less, but enough to matter over time. Second, the balance between damage and repair begins to change. Every day, your eyes are exposed to light. Light is necessary for vision, but it also creates a type of internal stress inside cells called oxidative stress. This simply means that certain molecules become unstable and can damage parts of the cell if they are not neutralized. When you are younger, your body has strong systems to handle this. It repairs damage quickly, it neutralizes those unstable molecules efficiently. After 60, those repair systems slow down. So now you have slightly less support coming in and slightly slower repair happening inside. And that combination allows small amounts of damage to accumulate. Again, this is not something you feel. It doesn't cause pain. It doesn't create an obvious signal. But over time, it changes how well those cells can function. Third, the macula becomes more sensitive. The macula is the part of the retina responsible for sharp, detailed vision. Reading, recognizing faces, seeing fine contrast, all of that depends on this small area. Because it works so hard and is exposed to light constantly, it is also one of the most vulnerable parts of the eye. As protection mechanisms weaken with age, the macula becomes more sensitive to oxidative stress, inflammation, and light-related damage. This is one of the reasons why certain age-related eye conditions tend to affect central vision first. Now, let me give you a quick example from clinical experience. I remember a patient in his early 70s who told me his vision felt mostly fine, but he noticed that reading in dim light had become frustrating. He thought it was just a lighting issue. When we looked closer, there were early signs that the macula was under more stress than expected. Nothing dramatic, but enough to explain the change he was feeling. And this illustrates something important about how the body works. Small functional changes often show up before clear disease. The system is already under strain, even if it hasn't crossed a diagnostic threshold. Now, there's another factor that becomes more important after 60. Inflammation. Not the kind you feel when you have an injury. This is low-level, ongoing inflammation that can exist quietly in the body. It can affect blood vessels. It can affect cellular function. And in the eye, it can make already vulnerable tissues even more sensitive. When inflammation is higher, the environment inside the eye becomes less stable. And again, this is not something you notice directly, but it changes how well the system holds up over time. There is also the question of fat composition in the body. The retina, especially certain cells within it, relies on specific types of fats to maintain structure and function. One of these is a type of omega-3 fat called DHA. DHA helps maintain the integrity of the outer segments of photoreceptor cells. These are the cells that respond to light. When DHA levels are lower, those structures are not as stable as they could be. This doesn't mean immediate vision loss, but it does mean reduced resilience. So now, if you step back and look at the full picture after 60, you begin to see a pattern. Blood flow is slightly reduced. Repair systems are slower. Oxidative stress accumulates more easily. Inflammation can be higher. Structural support in cells may be less stable. None of these changes alone are dramatic, but together, they create a system that is easier to disrupt. And that's why the same habits that didn't seem to matter much at 40 can have a very different impact at 60 or 70. This is also why some people feel like their vision changed suddenly. In reality, the process was gradual. It just reached a point where the system could no longer compensate as well. And once that threshold is crossed, the change becomes noticeable. This is the key idea. After 60, the eye has less reserve. It can still function well, but it has less margin for stress, less capacity to recover, and less tolerance for missing support. Which brings us back to something very practical. If the system is more vulnerable, then what you provide to support it becomes more important. Not in a theoretical way. In a daily, measurable way. Because certain nutrients directly support the macula, the retina, the blood vessels, and the protective systems inside the eye. And when those nutrients are consistently present, they help stabilize a system that is naturally becoming more fragile. So now the question becomes very specific. Which foods actually provide that kind of support, and which ones are simply neutral? And this is where the difference becomes very clear. Now that you understand why the eye becomes more vulnerable with age, we can move into something very practical. Not all foods support the eye in the same way. Some provide very little direct benefit to the retina or macula. Others contain compounds that are actively used inside the eye to protect, stabilize, and support those tissues. So I'm going to walk you through 7 specific foods that matter here. Not as a quick fix, but as consistent support for a system that depends on what you give it over time. 1. Dark leafy greens, spinach, kale, collards. These are one of the most important foods for eye health. They contain 2 key compounds, lutein and zeaxanthin. These are types of carotenoids that accumulate in the macula. What do? They act like a natural filter. They help absorb high-energy light, especially blue light, before it can damage sensitive cells in the retina. They also help reduce oxidative stress. There is strong evidence behind this. Large studies, including the AREDS Age-Related Eye Disease Study, supported by the National Eye Institute, have shown that higher intake of these carotenoids is associated with a lower risk of progression in age-related macular degeneration. The key point is consistency. This is not about eating spinach once a week. It's about regular exposure so those compounds can build up in the tissue where they are needed. 2. Fatty fish, salmon, sardines, mackerel. These provide omega-3 fatty acids, especially DHA. DHA is a structural component of the retina. It is part of the outer segments of photoreceptor cells, the cells that detect light. When DHA levels are adequate, those structures are more stable. When levels are low, the system is more fragile. There is also evidence that omega-3 intake is associated with a lower risk of dry eye symptoms and may support retinal health. Data from observational cohorts like the Women's Health Study and other large population analyses have shown associations between higher omega-3 intake and better visual outcomes. This is not a guarantee, but it is a consistent pattern that aligns with what we understand about how the eye is built. 3. Eggs, especially the yolk. Eggs are often underestimated in this context. The yolk contains lutein and zeaxanthin, just like leafy greens. But here is the difference. In eggs, these compounds are more bioavailable. That means your body absorbs them more easily. So, even though the total amount may be lower than in spinach or kale, the amount your body actually uses can be significant. Eggs also provide healthy fats, which help with the absorption of these fat-soluble nutrients. This combination makes them a very efficient way to support the macula. 4. Orange and yellow vegetables, carrots, sweet potatoes. These are rich in beta-carotene, which the body can convert into vitamin A. Vitamin A is essential for vision, especially in low-light conditions. It plays a role in the production of rhodopsin, a pigment in the retina that helps you see in dim light. When vitamin A levels are low, night vision is often one of the first things affected. Now, in developed countries, true vitamin A deficiency is less common, but intake still matters, because even moderate levels help support the overall function of the retina. And these foods also contain other antioxidants that contribute to cellular protection. 5. Berries, blueberries, blackberries, strawberries. Berries contain anthocyanins. These are plant compounds that give berries their deep color. They have antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. In the context of eye health, they may help support blood vessel function, circulation, and protection against oxidative stress. Some small clinical studies and observational data suggest that anthocyanins may improve certain aspects of visual performance, especially in low light conditions and during visual fatigue. The evidence here is not as strong as for lutein or omega-3s, but it is biologically plausible and supported by emerging research. 6. Nuts and seeds, almonds, sunflower seeds, walnuts. These are a good source of vitamin E. Vitamin E is a fat-soluble antioxidant. Its role is to protect cell membranes from oxidative damage. In the eye, this matters because the retina is rich in fatty structures, which are particularly vulnerable to oxidative stress. The AREDS formulation also includes vitamin E, which reinforces its importance in protecting against progression of certain eye conditions. Regular intake of nuts and seeds provides a steady supply of this protective nutrient. 7. Citrus fruits, oranges, grapefruit, lemons. These are high in vitamin C. Vitamin C supports the health of blood vessels, including those that supply the retina. It also acts as an antioxidant, helping reduce oxidative stress in tissues that are constantly exposed to light. Epidemiological data, including findings from NHANES, National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, and other cohort studies, have shown that higher vitamin C intake is associated with better eye health outcomes over time. Again, this is not a cure, but it is part of a protective pattern. Now, when you step back and look at these 7 foods together, a pattern becomes clear. They are not random. They support the eye in specific ways: filtering harmful light, stabilizing cell structure, supporting blood flow, reducing oxidative stress, maintaining function in low light. And importantly, they work best when they are part of a regular pattern, not occasional additions. Because the eye depends on what is consistently available, not what appears once in a while. But there is another side to this that often gets overlooked. Even if you include these foods, certain daily habits can quietly work against them. And that's where many people lose the benefit without realizing it. Now, here's where things often become confusing. Many people will start adding some of the foods we just discussed, but they don't see much difference. And the reason is simple. Support on one side does not fully cancel damage on the other. If certain daily eating patterns are quietly stressing the same system you're trying to protect, the overall effect becomes weaker. So let's look at a few of the most common patterns that tend to work against eye health after 60. One of the biggest is a low nutrient density diet. This doesn't mean you're not eating enough food. It means the food you eat does not contain enough of the specific nutrients the eye depends on. For example, meals that rely heavily on refined grains, packaged snacks, foods that are high in calories but low in micronutrients. These can leave the retina under-supported, because even though you are eating regularly, the cells are not receiving lutein, zeaxanthin, vitamin C, vitamin E, or omega-3 fats. And without those, the balance between stress and protection shifts in the wrong direction. This is very common. People often feel they are eating normally, but from a cellular perspective, the support system is thin. Another pattern is high intake of ultra-processed foods. These foods tend to contain lower levels of protective nutrients, include additives and fats that may promote low-grade inflammation, and create unstable energy patterns in the body. Over time, this matters. Because inflammation does not stay in one place, it affects blood vessels, including the small vessels that supply the eye. And when those vessels are under stress, circulation becomes less efficient. That directly affects how well the retina is supported. There is also the issue of blood sugar spikes. Even in people who do not have diabetes, repeated spikes in blood sugar can affect the small blood vessels. The retina is particularly sensitive to this, because it relies on consistent, stable circulation. When blood sugar rises sharply and then drops, it creates a form of stress inside the vascular system. Over time, this can affect vessel integrity, nutrient delivery, and overall retinal stability. In people with diabetes, this effect is more pronounced and well documented. But even outside of diabetes, variability still matters. Another common issue is poor fat balance. This is something many people overlook. The type of fat you consume influences the structure of your cells. As we discussed earlier, the retina depends on specific fats like DHA, but many diets are low in omega-3 fats and higher in less supportive fats. When that imbalance persists, the structural stability of photoreceptor cells is not as strong as it could be. Again, this doesn't create immediate symptoms, but it reduces resilience. There is also a subtle but important pattern related to skipping protective foods even when calories are adequate. For example, someone may eat enough total food, enough protein, enough calories, but still rarely include leafy greens, berries, fish, nuts. From a general perspective, the diet may seem acceptable. But from the perspective of eye health, key protective inputs are missing. This creates a quiet gap, and that gap widens over time. Now, there's one more layer that becomes more important after 60: recovery capacity. Earlier in life, the body can often compensate for less optimal patterns. There is more reserve. After 60, that reserve is lower, which means the same pattern that caused minimal impact before can now have a measurable effect. This is why some people feel like their vision changed more quickly in later years. It's not always that the damage suddenly started. It's that the system became less able to buffer it. So if you look at this as a whole, there are two sides. On one side, foods that support the retina and macula. On the other, patterns that quietly increase stress and reduce support. And both sides matter, because adding protective foods without addressing harmful patterns is like reinforcing one part of a structure while leaving another part unstable. To really protect your eyesight, both need to be considered together. And once you understand that, the next step becomes much simpler. You don't need a complicated diet. You need a consistent pattern that includes the right foods, avoids the most common disruptions, and fits into everyday life without effort. And that's where we can bring everything together into something you can actually use. When you put all of this together, the goal is not to follow a strict diet. It's to create a pattern that consistently supports the eye without making daily life complicated. Because what protects your vision is not a single food or a single day. It's repetition. So let's make this practical. Think of this as a simple framework you can follow without needing to track everything. Start with the first anchor. Build at least one meal each day around eye-supporting foods. That could look like adding leafy greens to a lunch or dinner, including a portion of fatty fish a few times a week, or combining eggs with vegetables in the morning. The goal is not perfection. It's consistency, because these nutrients work best when they are present regularly. Second, pair nutrients so your body can actually use them. Some of the most important compounds for the eye are fat-soluble. That means they need fat to be absorbed properly. For example, lutein and zeaxanthin from grains, vitamin A from orange vegetables. If you eat them without any fat, absorption is lower. So something as simple as adding olive oil to vegetables, eating eggs with grains, or including nuts with a meal can make a meaningful difference. This is a small adjustment, but it improves how effective your food actually is. Third, stabilize your blood sugar through meal structure. This matters more than many people realize. Instead of meals that are mostly refined carbohydrates, aim for balance. Include protein. Include healthy fats. Include fiber. This slows down how quickly sugar enters the bloodstream, and that helps protect the small blood vessels that supply the retina. You don't need to eliminate carbohydrates. You just need to avoid sharp spikes followed by sharp drops. Fourth, reduce the patterns that quietly work against you. This doesn't mean removing everything you enjoy. It means being aware of frequency. If ultra-processed foods or low-nutrient meals are happening daily, that becomes a problem. If they are occasional, the impact is much smaller. So the question is not, do I ever eat these foods? The question is, how often do they dominate my routine? That distinction matters. Fifth, support your weekly pattern, not just individual meals. You don't need to eat every protective food every day. But across a week, there should be regular exposure to leafy greens, fish, fruits like berries or citrus, nuts or seeds. Think in terms of rhythm rather than perfection, because the body responds to patterns over time. Sixth, pay attention to early signals, even if they seem minor. Things like needing more light to read, slower adjustment between bright and dark, increased glare sensitivity. These are not just inconveniences. They can be early indicators that the system is under more stress. They don't mean something severe is happening, but they do mean it's worth supporting the system more actively. Seventh, bring this into your medical conversations when needed. If you are already managing diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, then eye health becomes even more important, because these conditions affect the same systems: blood vessels, inflammation, cellular stability. So it's reasonable to ask how your condition may affect your eyes, whether screening should be more frequent, and whether your current habits are supportive enough. This turns awareness into action. Now, if you step back, this entire approach is not complicated. It comes down to a few key ideas. Support the system regularly. Avoid consistent stress patterns. Adjust for lower reserve after 60. And respond early rather than late. That's what protects function over time. Not extreme changes. Not short-term effort. But steady support. If you found this helpful and you want more clear, practical explanations like this, consider subscribing. The goal here is to help you understand how your body works so you can take action early, not react late. And I'm also curious, which part of this felt most familiar to you? Was it the changes in vision, the eating patterns, or something else you hadn't connected before? From a clinical perspective, the most important shift is this. Vision loss rarely feels urgent at the beginning. It develops quietly, under the surface. But the factors that influence it are present every day. And once you understand that, your daily choices become much more meaningful. Because you're no longer waiting for a problem to appear. You're supporting a system that depends on you long before it asks for help.